Good morning, everyone, and happy Thursday. I know it's a rainy Thursday across some sections of Trinidad and Tobago, so I hope you're keeping dry. My name is Gracia White from the Calibra Solutions Limited team. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have some very interesting stuff for you in store, so I hope that you will enjoy it at the very least, and you can ask as many questions as you want. So without further ado, I will be sharing my screen. Great. So this morning, we will be covering the 3 R's of cyber resilience, how to build an effective incident response program. Today, our presenting partners are Regional Compliance Consultants Limited and Calibra Solutions Limited. I'll tell you a little bit about both companies. So Regional Compliance Consultants Limited, their mission is to provide regulatory compliance solutions and guidance to financial institutions and listed businesses in the Caribbean region. Their directors have been responsible for operations management, human resources, risk management, product development, and regulatory compliance in the Caribbean and the United States for over 20 years. Target clients include credit unions, financial institutions, insurance agents and brokers, investment advisors, non-regulated financial institutions, realtors, jewelers, or dealers of precious metals, as well as accountants and conveyancing attorneys. Calibra Solutions Limited, we are a leading information technology consultancy based in the Caribbean, delivering advanced, innovative, and reliable data-driven solutions that drive measurable impact. We help businesses grow their sales, increase profits, stay secure, and reduce expenses by making smarter, faster decisions through advanced analytics, robust AI-powered cybersecurity solutions, financial technology platforms, and comprehensive digital transformation strategies. Our client coverage includes the Caribbean, Central America, and West Africa. And some of our client sectors include central banks, commercial banks, credit unions, public sector entities, utility and energy service companies, telecom service providers, manufacturing and distribution enterprises. So who will be presenting to you today? So we have 4 of the best for you, starting with Ms. B. Roxanne Ford, Principal Consultant, RCC Limited, Obika Gelano, Security Consultant, Joel Mitchell, Technology Specialist, and Anthony Payson, Cybersecurity and ICT Leader. Ms. B. Roxanne Ford is RCC Limited's Principal Consultant. She specializes in providing practical regulatory compliance solutions and guidance to financial institutions and listed businesses in the region. She also develops and implements regulatory compliance policies and procedures, conducts gap analysis, and AML, anti-money laundering risk assessments. Ms. B. Roxanne Ford has over 20 years of experience as a compliance professional, delivering customized training for boards of directors, management, and staff across industries throughout the Caribbean on regional AML, CFT, CFP legislation, TIEAA, data privacy, FCPA, anti-bribery and corruption, ethical sales practices, and the Insurance Act. She's also a registered insurance consultant with the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, member of faculty at UWI Roytech and the Trinidad and Tobago Insurance Institute. Our second presenter is Obika Gelano, who is a seasoned cybersecurity professional, currently serving as security consultant at Fujitsu Caribbean. Obika has over a decade of experience in information technology audit, digital forensics, business continuity, threat intelligence, penetration testing, data privacy, cybersecurity program development for private and public sectors. He holds multiple certifications, including Security Plus, Pentest Plus, and Certified Cryptocurrency Auditor. He's actively involved in regional cyber resilience efforts, serving with the ISACA TNT chapter, and shares his expert insights through platforms such as ICT Pulse Podcast, Medium, and LinkedIn. Our third presenter is Joel Mitchell, who's a university lecturer at the University of the Southern Caribbean, specializing in cybersecurity. Joel has over a decade of experience in the field with extensive expertise in security management, risk assessment, and information systems protection. He's the holder of a Master of Science degree in information technology with a concentration in security management. Joel is particularly focused on advancing best practices in cyber education and implementation, and is driven by a commitment to develop the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. And last but by certainly no means least, Mr. Anthony Payson, a distinguished cybersecurity and ICT leader with nearly 3 decades of experience shaping technology governance, risk, and security strategies across the finance, telecommunications, and energy sectors. He's the founding president of the ISC2 Caribbean chapter and a member of ISACA, EC Council, and ACFE. Anthony is particularly recognized for his ability to align digital security with organizational purpose, guided enterprises through secure and sustainable transformation journeys to strengthen resilience and operational integrity. He's also the holder of multiple globally respected certifications and credentials, including CISSP, Data Privacy, and COBIT 2019, all of which reflect his deep expertise in cybersecurity, governance, compliance, risk management, information assurance, and digital trust frameworks. So why are we here today? So to give you some context on why we chose the topic, the 3 R's of cyber resilience. So today's digital first landscape, the threat of cyber attacks looms much larger than ever. The Cybersecurity Ventures Cybersecurity Almanac projected 10.5 trillion in global damages from cybercrime this year in 2025, increasing from 9.5 trillion last year. According to the CARICOM Cybersecurity and Cybercrime Action Plan 2025, the Caribbean region's threat landscape now encompasses a broad range of cyber incidents, from ransomware to data breaches, phishing, and cyber-enabled fraud. Financial institutions, amongst others, are prime targets for cyber criminals because of the large volumes of sensitive data and, of course, the potential for significant financial gain. Cyber incidents are disruptive, as we know. They cripple essential systems, cause significant operational downtime, financial losses, loss of company and customer data, exposes sensitive personal data, of which we've seen instances here in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, create significant company reputational damage. And they are only expected to increase every year. To give you some context, I'll share some details that the TT Computer Forensics and Security Institute provided this year in October. So in 2024, we had 13 total incidents, which have now increased to 18, just January to October 2025 alone. The top countries in 2024, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. And in 2025, Barbados has joined the pack, so to speak, and of course, Jamaica. Top sectors in 2025, finance as mentioned, public sectors, and tourism. Dominant groups include groups like Cubalane, Lynx, and particularly we're seeing a new trend with supply chains being affected. And finally, organizations continue to spend substantial sums to improve their cyber resilience. And that simply means using solutions to identify and shut down threats as close to real time as possible. However, I think it's fair to say that breaches are now inevitable and with increased frequency and sophistication. So any robust cyber resilience strategy for any company, small, medium, or large, must now include systematic and coordinated incident readiness, response, and recovery. In other words, a very key question to ask yourself: if there's a security incident today, tomorrow, next week, in the future, how ready are my organization's people, processes, and technology to prevent escalation into a full-blown crisis. So that's why we're here. So I will now launch a poll question just to get you guys nice and warm and acquainted with what we're going to talk about. So first question, what keeps you up at night when thinking about incident response? Detecting the breach too late, managing recovery and downtime costs, loss of customer and organizational data, handling customer trust and public image. I'll give everyone a few seconds to indicate their. Right, I think we can end poll. So we actually had a tie here with managing recovery and downtime costs, as well as loss of customer and organizational data, and then detecting the breach too late. All very salient points, guys. Thank you so much for participating. So now I want to hand over to Ms. B. Roxanne Ford. Roxanne, let me know if you are seeing the screen. Okay, all right. So I'll try my best to be Roxanne, so bear with me. So as I mentioned, regional compliance consultants, they provide practical regulatory compliance solutions and guidance to financial institutions and listed businesses in the region. And they've been established since May 2013. So what does the central bank's cybersecurity guideline say? So these guidelines issued in September 2023 were established to provide companies with principles for cyber resilience. The beauty, so to speak, of the guideline is that they're not restricted to institutions which are regulated by the central bank, but can be used as best practices for all institutions. The guideline covers entities authorized on the following statutory laws: Financial Institutions Act 2008 and the Insurance Act 2018. The guideline contains 6 mandatory actions and 15 complementary actions. And each of these actions contain 2 to 4 controls that entities must implement to be compliant. The 6, well, I like to refer to them as principles, but the 6 principles are governance, risk management, awareness and training, business continuity and disaster recovery, testing, incident management, and reporting. And in terms of supervision and enforcement, all entities, including non-regulated, should complete an annual self-assessment by March 31st of each year. So in other words, today, November 20, you have until March 31st, 2026 to complete your self-assessment. That allows you to see all of the controls within the 6 principles and where you fall, whether you're compliant, partially compliant, or non-compliant. Regular independent reviews should be submitted to central bank. Central bank will review your self-assessment and the independent reviews, and they will conduct risk-based on-site examinations to verify compliance. We also encourage a risk-based approach to manage your cybersecurity program. That includes being able to identify assets, cyber threats, and vulnerabilities, using a risk assessment program to evaluate your cyber risk, developing cyber risk management strategies based on risk appetite, and implementing controls to reduce or monitor cyber risk. Your cybersecurity strategic plan is driven by the risk assessment, and it should span a timeline of 3 years, approved by your internal board, and annually reviewed for effectiveness. Control activities outlined in the strategic plan should give priority to the controls that manage the high risks identified in the risk assessment. I'll also mention that if you have any doubts, you are not alone. This is why we're here at Calibra and Regional Compliance Consultants to guide you along the way, including hand-holding and any necessary treatment to help you understand, because it's in everyone's interest to maintain your resilient cybersecurity. So I am happy to hand over to Obika. Actually, I've just been reminded I have another poll question, which is, does your company's, see Rox answering it, right. Does your company's current cybersecurity strategy include annual training? And the choices are, yes, our strategy includes mandatory annual training for all employees. Yes, it is optional or awareness-based only. No, we have neither a cybersecurity strategy nor a formal training program. And I'm just not sure. Right, appreciate everyone's feedback. So far I'm seeing, no, we have neither. I'm seeing a bit of, I'm not sure, and yes, our strategy. So as I mentioned to everyone attending, we can help you with that. Fear not, reach out to us, ask the questions in this webinar to help you form your own cybersecurity strategy, as well as a formal training plan. So I think you guys have heard enough of me so far. So I'm gonna hand over to Obika. Obika, I'm also sharing slides, so let me do that now.
Hi. Oh, Gracia, I'm not hearing you right now. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to keep off mute.
Okay.
Let me know when you're ready to move. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me just share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. You should be seeing it now, I believe.
Yes.
All right, great. Morning, everyone. My name is Obika Jeleno, and I will be going through the incident readiness section of our webinar today. Oh, right, there we go. Okay, so before we get into the entire aspect of incident readiness, we should really talk about the entire idea, or the focus should be really on incident management. You know, the way in which you structure a process to manage your IT infrastructure to respond in response to any unplanned interruption or downtime to your service operations. And that's really the whole idea behind incident management. So here I have a short definition on what it is, but what I would say is that it requires prioritization by impact and urgency. So you should have some level of triaging as part of your incident management process. It also requires a lot of clear and timely communication between all stakeholders. It's not only focused on IT teams and IT teams alone, it's across the entire organization, and it could impact both your customers as well as your business partners. So communication is very important as it relates to incident management. And then last but not least, it should be constantly reviewed and improved upon. Technology changes, and with the rapid pace of technology, especially since we've moved into the age of AI, things will be changing. Eventually, we'll move into the age of quantum computing, and all that changes the way in which you handle incidents as you add technology or you change your technology infrastructure. So you need to change that incident response process as you go along. Now, incident management on the whole can be a very complex process, but for this particular webinar, we've tried to kind of break it down into three major areas. First area being readiness, next area being response, and then the last one being recovery. All three are intertwined with each other, and as we go through the different areas, you'll see how it forms a kind of cycle, and all of that is part of being continuous improvement. In terms of incident management, again, there are various set of terms that you'll come across, right? Here I have a list of terms that you'll see throughout this webinar, and you should try and get yourself familiar with, because you're going to be using a lot of these terms as you build your incident management program within your organization. Of course, the first one being what an incident is. It's an unplanned interruption of an information system that affects its confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Pretty straightforward, and it's clear as to what you're focusing on as an incident, right? And then you have things like the incident response plan, which is planning activities, to respond to an incident. But then you see different other terms here that you might not be too familiar with. You have recovery point objective, recovery time objective, maximum tolerable period of disruption. These terms you tend to see more with business continuity. And now you're asking yourself, why am I talking about business continuity in incident management terms? What you tend to see is that when you're handling an incident, you may, in some instances, enact a business continuity plan and by extension, a disaster recovery plan. So an incident response plan kind of plays into business continuity and disaster recovery. And as I go through this next set of slides, you see how it all links together. And then as it relates to business continuity, your business impact analysis, your continuity plan, your disaster recovery plan also have a part or partial part to play within your incident management on the whole. So make sure to familiarize yourself with these terms. You're going to be seeing it not only within this presentation, but as you build your incident response plan. But how do these terms kind of interlink with each other? So here I have an incident timeline, or what happens usually within a business when an incident does occur, right? So if we're going from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, you could see that as we're at 100% and we eventually hit a disaster, everything drops, right? You have that interruption, either whether it be a loss of a system or loss of multiple systems. It basically stops your business. And now you have to activate your incident response plan. In some instances, depending on what type of incident it is, you can end up activating your business continuity plan. But for the purpose of this demonstration of the timeline, I'm going to just talk about it in terms of activating the incident response plan. And then as you go along and you try to recover your systems through the activation of your plan, eventually you will reach to a point where you need to bring the business back up and running, or at least some of your systems back up and running. So you have a point in time where you have to resume business and then recover slowly by 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. Usually at that point where you need to resume business is where you activate again your BCP plan or your disaster recovery plan. Now, your disaster recovery plan is basically a secondary site or maybe a way in which you have backup systems to continue your computerized systems in the event of an outage at your primary site, right? And if we look to the bottom of the diagram, you see where the RPO, RTO, and maximum tolerable period of downtime, the MTPD, all come into play, right? Within this incident response time. All these measures are needed for determining how you develop your incident response plan, and also by extension, your BCP and your disaster recovery, but they all come into play and they're all very much important. So you should actually be trying to get yourself very much familiar with an incident timeline and where these recovery point objectives and time objectives and all these measures come into play. as you develop your plan. So let's take a look at incident readiness framework, right? Now, this is not something that you really see in a book. For the purposes of this webinar, I went ahead and developed this readiness framework to kind of highlight the areas that you need to focus on when developing your incident response program, right? So you have three particular areas. As a cybersecurity specialist, normally when I am developing a program, I look at it in terms of three distinct areas. You have your people, your process, and then your technology, right? So under people, as it relates to incident readiness, we're looking at the development of an incident response policy and an incident response team. On the process, we're looking at the development of an incident response plan and an incident response playbooks. And then last but not least, for the technology side, we look at detection and analysis tools and response and containment tools. Underneath all of that, you have your incident response testing. Your incident response testing covers everything across the board. So when you are actually testing your incident response processes, your plans, your playbooks, your policy, and so on and so forth, when you're running those tests, you're covering everything there in order to then improve upon the system, including your detection and analysis tools as well as your response and containment tools, right? So let's talk about the incident response policy. So the policy defines the minimum requirements for managing information system incidents or IT incidents, right? At a minimum, your policy should include, and if you look at the table here, all these different areas. Now, like I said, it's at a minimum. There's other things that you can add to the policy, but at a minimum, it should include these sections. What I would say about the policy is that the policy is the constitution of your incident management program. And by extension, it guides everything in terms of your incident response planning, your incident response testing, and other activities that you should do within your organization. So if you do have to start somewhere, start in terms of developing the policy. You don't need to get it right the first time. Remember, everything is a continuous improvement. So if there are areas that you miss inside your policy, you can always catch it on a review of the policy, maybe later in the year, or however, how often you have to review your policy. You can always make the updates there, but you should try and get a incident response policy in place before you even start your planning activities. So you need to cover things like scope, which is pretty straightforward. It's just, what are your systems and areas and locations that are covered by the management process. Then you have definitions, which kind of gives descriptions of what an incident is, what an event is, what a data breach is, what an alert is, and all those different terms that you would utilize as part of your incident management process. Roles and responsibilities, you talk about the incident response team and the persons who have the final authority to make decisions on incident response within your organization. This particular section is extremely important, the incident classification. And this is the criteria of classifying incidents as either low, medium, high, or critical, and also documenting the SLAs. When I say SLA, as in the turnaround time. So like, for example, if you get a high incident, you need to respond to that incident within maybe, I would say 30 minutes to an hour. If it's something critical, it has to be maybe 10 minutes or 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes. Or if it's like a medium, it could be 12 hours or a day. However you decide to set those response times, that's what a SLA is, right? Always note, however, when you're putting in those SLAs, it must be less than the RTO. Specifically for critical and high incidents, right? Because those are the ones that tend to have a major impact on your IT systems and your business as well. You also have the legal and regulatory section, the requirements by your regulator or any sort of legal framework that must be met during the incident. And then last but not least, policy enforcement, which is just consequences of violating policy, So let's talk about the incident response team. Now, this is a cross-functional group of specialists and decision makers who work together to manage security incidents from detection to recovery. Cross-functional. It's not IT and it's not IT alone. There are a lot of times that I've seen incident response teams where it's just only people in IT and that's it. It's cross-functional across the board. Do not put incident response just under the IT banner, right? You need to have not only your technical roles, but you need to also have your business roles, right? And everybody here needs to have some sort of, or play some sort of part within the incident response process. Not everybody's going to have a responsibility within it. Some persons may be just informed or consulted as part of the incident response process. But at the end of the day, everybody on the business side and on the technical side has a part to play in terms of the incident response process. So if we look at the technical side, you have your incident response manager, who's usually the IT manager or maybe an information security manager. That person leads the technical response, coordinates the team, and makes on-spot decisions. You have the security analyst who does the monitoring and the triaging of the incidents. You have your administrator who does the technical actions for containment and recovery. And later down in the presentation, we'll talk about those particular actions as well. You have your forensic investigator, which does not need to be somebody internally. It can be somebody externally as well. That person preserves digital evidence as it relates to the incident for ongoing investigations, just in case you do need to have some level of investigation as part of the incident. And then you have your third-party providers who are usually informed and they usually assist with the recovery efforts. And this is kind of dependent on the roles and responsibilities and where your infrastructure lies. But your third parties are going to be part of your incident response team. They're not probably going to have much of a part to play in it. They may just be an informed party, or depending on how things go, they may actually be actual responsible party. It really depends. Right? And then you have your business rules, you have your executive sponsor, who's usually a C-suite executive. That is the ultimate decision maker. You have legal counsel, who's very much important. They need to advise on any legal or regulatory requirements. You have your communication officers. Communications officers is always needed because I've seen instances where an incident happened and then a month later, we see communications go out to customers. And I've seen it happen with local companies here in Trinidad and Tobago, where they have an attack, and a whole month later, the customers are being advised that an attack happened and nothing occurred. And then there was another incident recently where they said nothing occurred, none of their information was stolen, and then the hackers placed all of the information that they pulled from that particular client on the internet and was selling it. So communications is extremely important, and the way in which you word your communications is very much needed for your incident response. You also have human resources, and last but not least, you also have internal audit, who's an informed party. And if there's any internal investigations, internal audit is usually a part of that as well. So now let's get into the meat and the potatoes of it. The incident response plan. The incident response plan is a strategic level document for the entire incident response team. It defines the structure and is a general approach to managing incident response. That's all you need to know in terms of the incident response plan at a high level, at a very high level, right? However, when you get into it, you see other things, like, for example, it defines the incident response life cycle. And if you look to your right, you see an example of that, which is preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. That life cycle is a more detailed look at it, but if you remember the initial slides that I had when I now started off, we were talking about readiness, recovery, readiness, response and recovery. It's the same thing, it's just a more detailed approach as it relates to that. It also details the roles and responsibility of each team member and the reporting escalation paths. That's very much important for the incident response plan, the reporting escalation paths. And as well, it's not on the slide here, but communications is also included in your incident response plan. So you need to have those level of details in your plan. Also, you must outline escalation path to your business continuity and your disaster recovery plan. And I have an example of that below, right? If within your incident response, if you go past that RTO, right? That RTO timeline that, if you remember from the incident timeline, the RTO is when your system is down for a certain amount of time before you have to resume business. If you go beyond that time limit, you need to trigger your business. You can either trigger your business continuity plan or your disaster recovery plan. It really depends on the situation and whatever trigger mechanisms there are. But your plan needs to detail this. And by extension, your business continuity plan and your DR plan needs to also indicate how you move from a IR response plan to triggering a BCP plan as well. Now let's talk about the playbook. Now the playbook is very much different to the plan. Whereas the plan is at a strategic level, the playbook is a tactical level, and it's only for the incident response team. And its main focus is on specific security incidents, right? It's not a general type document. It's actually multiple documents that focus on common cyber threats. Now, if you look to the right here, I have ransomware, denial of service, malware, business email compromise, and phishing. Those are common threats that you tend to see. And in some instances, like for example, ransomware requires a special type of response as compared to maybe just ordinary malware. And by extension, denial of service, business email response and stuff like that. The incident response playbook works in tandem with the plan. However, the incident response playbook details the specific actions and the technical commands, the tools, the technical escalation paths. It's a lot more detailed. There's step-by-step procedures for actually detecting the incident, how you contain it, how you eradicate for that specific threat. So the way in which you detect, contain, eradicate for ransomware is going to be different to denial of service, different to malware, and so on. So the playbook must be a part of the plan, but it has to be specific to a specific incident. And normally how I look at it is that I look at, if I'm developing my incident response playbooks, I look at it in terms of what are the incidents that are likely to highly impact my organization, and I start there. And then I may look at it in terms of maybe the ones that may mediumly, or sorry, I shouldn't say medium, but have a medium impact to the organization. So like ransomware and malware are probably going to have a high impact, but denial of service, because of how networks are nowadays, that might not be a high impact, that might be a medium impact. Phishing may be medium to low, business email compromise may be medium to high, right? So I may focus on ransomware, malware, and business email compromise in terms of developing my playbooks first, and then touch on denial of service and phishing thereafter. So, but you should have a set of incidents that you focus on. And once you focus on those incidents, you develop your playbook for that. Everything else outside of that, you leave for the plan. So let's talk about detection and analysis tools. Now, the detection and analysis tools focus on the preparation, detection, and analysis stages of the incident response lifecycle. So if you remember that long diagram when think it was the plan. Yeah, when we were looking at the plan in terms of the incident response life cycle. For the preparation, detection, and analysis, these would be the tools that you would use for those particular stages, right? The purpose of these tools is to collect data, provide some level of visibility in terms of your infrastructure or your IT infrastructure, and assist your security teams in terms of identifying threats and understanding what is the possible root cause of the incident. So in terms, now I'm not going to go through everything in overly detail, but what I would say is that for a organization, you should have at least a vulnerability scanner, a SIEM or a security information and event management, EDR, endpoint detection and response. And some other nice to haves are usually like the extended detection response, which is just advanced version of the EDR. You should have some level of threat intelligence platforms, which, provide you threat data from various sources to kind of enhance your alerts on your various tools that are monitoring your infrastructure, or at least your SIEM. And then there's also the user entity behavior analytics, which monitors user and system behavior. It's very advanced, and it uses machine learning to kind of flag any suspicious activities. So you can see the various examples in the rightmost column of this table in terms of the different types of scanners and the different types of tools. But it's extremely important that you at least have a vulnerability scanner and you have a tool that's available to you that centralizes and analyzes all the log data within your systems, your applications, your network devices to try and detect anomalies, right? What I've seen in organizations is that they have vulnerability scanners and maybe they have an endpoint detection, but they have nothing in terms of monitoring logs on the different systems. Because what I can tell you is that sometimes the way in which malware works or ransomware works, it can bypass endpoint detection altogether. And the only way you can detect it is by having something monitoring your systems 24/7 and looking for any sort of anomalies on those systems by analyzing logs being produced on those systems. And then for technology, again, as it relates to your incident response program, we have the response and containment tools. Now, these focus on the containment, eradication, and recovery stages of our incident response lifecycle, right? The purpose of these tools are to stop the cyber attack from spreading, eliminate the threat, and restore the system back to what it was before the incident. And by extension, hardening and other things will happen. And that's part of the recovery stage, but we'll get into that later down the line. So in terms of these tools, you have a couple that people should be familiar with, like backup and recovery. Incident management collaboration is like help desk systems. So like you have ServiceNow and Sysaid and so on. Those are centralized platform to track and manage and communicate all aspects of the incidents, like a ticketing system. But some of the others persons might not be familiar with, like network intrusion prevention systems. These are systems that monitor your traffic. Most firewalls tend to have these nowadays. But what I've seen in the past is that persons don't tend to enable it, but you should enable it, right? That's a way of preventing attacks from spreading. You also have SOAR, or Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. That's a more advanced version of a SIEM, where SIEM usually tends to detect, but SOAR not only detects, but it also responds to the anomaly, right? And it actually tries to stop it from spreading across the board. And then you have other aspects such as digital forensics and reverse engineering. For digital forensics, again, this is a way of collecting information. You need to collect information on that system prior to you trying to recover it, because you need that information to not only do internal investigations if necessary, but also digital forensics can also be used to harden your systems and further protect your systems to prevent that attack from being successful again after incident response. And then you have reverse engineering, which is related to understanding the analysis of malware. So if you do get, now this is not normally something that's done within businesses. Reverse engineering is highly technical, and you tend to see more security companies using uh, uh, that technique to kind of understand malware and understand how it was able to penetrate the network and what it was using, IP addresses and so on and so forth that could be used to kind of prevent an ongoing attack. So those are all the response and containment tools that we'll come across. Then last but not least for this section, let's talk about incident response testing. Incident response testing is extremely important for your program on the whole, or your incident management on the whole. It spreads across the entire gambit of the different documents and the plans and the tools that we have in use in terms of responding to incidents. Excuse me. So there are three types of testing that you can do in terms of incident response. You have the tabletop exercises, the partial testing, and you have the live testing. Tabletop, most persons tend to understand what this is. However, what I would say is that the execution is extremely important for tabletop. You are simulating a test of a specific incident. You gather a group of managers, you actually walk through the documentation, the plan, and the playbooks, and you check to see if there are any inaccuracies in terms of responding to that particular scenario or that simulated test. Tabletop exercises are pretty short. They're usually about, I'd say, 2 to 3 hours, 2 hours at the low end, 3 hours depending on how the discussion goes. But they're very important, specifically for looking at your plan and your playbooks. Then you have your partial testing. Your partial testing is a non-evasive test of a particular system or application. So in this instance, the team actually executes these steps in the plan and the playbooks on a specific system. They do not disconnect the system. They do not stop the system. It's usually done during off hours when nobody's actually using the system or doing processing on the system, right? And the positive thing about this is that it actually exposes any gap in your playbook procedures, any problems in terms of communication, and any problems in terms of restoration of the system, right? Partial testing tends to focus on one particular application. However, you can do multiple applications if you choose to do partial testing. By the end of the day, you do not disconnect the system, and if you are running particular routines to, let's say, maybe get an image off of the system or to actually run an analysis on the system, all of that is done off hours. Okay. And then you have the live system, or what I like to call disaster recovery testing. And that's when you actually stop the primary system and you fail over to your secondary system. This again is also done during off hours when nobody's doing the processing. So you actually stop the primary system, you move all your network connections across to your secondary. You check to see if the secondary is running as intended, and then you go right back to your primary. This one actually is the true, in my opinion, is the true litmus test in terms of your recovery procedures, and to know whether or not your incident response is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, and as well as your disaster recovery as well, right? Often this type of testing can expose failover in expose gaps in your failover procedures, again, as well as communication and in terms of restoration to your primary site. So what I would say to you is that if you're now starting off, start with tabletop exercises, and then maybe within the year of your incident management, you then take a look at partial testing. Disaster recovery requires, or life testing, sorry, would require one, a disaster recovery site, and two, a lot of coordination and effort. So, however, it's extremely important that you should do it. So you should at least maybe try and do it once every 2 years, or if possible, once every 3 years, just to make sure that if you do have a backup system, or you do have some level of failover procedures, it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, in terms of your incident response planning, and by extension, your disaster recovery planning as well. And that concludes this section of the webinar. I believe Joel is up next, so he will take you through incident response.
Yes, thank you so much, Obika. Whilst Joel sets up, Obika, I do have a question. For very small companies who may not necessarily have the bodies to, complete a comprehensive incident response team, what would be your recommendations to at least have something in place? Because we know it's important, but if you just don't have the resources, what should be at least the minimum things to cover?
So you need to at least have, so you need to identify the executive sponsor. You need to identify the person who would be leading the charge on it. Obviously, also you need to identify the administrator. In terms of security, you can do one of two things. You can bring in a security analyst, or you can outsource as well. But you do need somebody on retainer to, if in case of something does occur that is outside the gambit of your IT team that they can't handle, you should have somebody on retainer to come in and execute your incident response plan and assist in terms of that response and recovery, at least. They may not need to be there for the readiness part, but at least the response and recovery, a specialist should be on retainer.
Oops, thank you so much, Obika.
Sure.
Joel, will you be presenting, or would you like me to help you out with that?
No, I could present.
All right, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Joel Mitchell, and I will be taking you guys back through incident response. So Obika just took us through the preparation. Now, what do we do when we actually have an incident, or we have some sort of a threat actually breaking into the organization? Right, so they say after a cyber attack, right, we need to follow a structured incident response plan, right? That's what Obika basically gave us. And it'll be focused on reporting, immediate containment, expert investigation, threat eradication, and system recovery from clean backups and a post-incident analysis to prevent reoccurrence, right? See where we went wrong. So first thing we want to do, we have an incident that took place, whether it's like someone hacked or it was like an infection, whatever it is. The first thing that we need to do is we need to contain the threat. Sometimes it may just affect a small portion of the network. Sometimes it may be the entire network. Sometimes it may only affect certain systems. We want to isolate all affected systems and devices, and we want to basically take them off of the network, right, temporarily, right, in order to stop the attack or to stop the threat from spreading, right? What we don't want to do, however, is to shut down these systems, because if we have to do like some sort of auditing, or we need to do some sort of digital forensics, right? If we switch off the systems, all or some of the evidence will be lost. So we want to contain, but we don't want to switch off the machines. We don't want to start to eradicate just yet, right? We just want to contain the infection or the infiltration in the initial stages. So once we contain it, we want to document everything and we want to preserve evidence, right? Sometimes we could take, as an organization, you may be able to take legal action against the perpetrators or the pending. So you want to preserve all evidence, you want to document everything from what you noticed, from what was affected, etc. So you want to start an incident log immediately, right? Recording all of the facts, right? A timeline of the events, right? Once you know when the initial when the incident initially started, right? All affected systems and subsystems and the actions that were taken, right? You want to preserve all the digital evidence for forensic analysis and again for or dependent for potential legal action. So now we want to activate the incident response team. So because he talked about putting the plan in place, getting the policies done, etc. Now we actually want to spring it into action. We actually want to mobilize it. So the incident response team, it may include your cybersecurity experts, legal advisors, very important, PR specialists. As you were saying, you don't want to not let your customers know that something happened. It's one thing, as he was saying, with the local incident where they said nothing was taken and stuff appeared on the internet as one thing. Is another thing if it's not if the customers are not informed at all. The customers now they actually may have cause for legal actions against the organization, and we need to be careful of that, right? And of course, other IT professionals. So this team will manage the containment, the investigation, and all of the communication efforts with the governing bodies, with the internal staff at the organization, and of course to the customers as well. Right? Very important. We want to start getting legal counsel as soon as possible. So you want to engage with legal experts to ensure full compliance with all regulatory requirements. And you want to get guidance on the necessary notifications to authorities and to the customers themselves, the affected individuals, right? Sometimes the affected individuals, they may be internal or external people. So we want to assess the damage. We want to determine the scope. We want to determine the nature, what type of attack was used, and the origin of the attack, right? We want to identify what data was accessed or stolen and which systems became compromised, right? So that basically ties back into, the first couple points that we would have looked at the start of this topic. Right, then of course we want to remove the threat. So we localize the threat before to keep it from spreading. Now we want to find a safe way to eliminate the threat with, of course, preserving evidence and without damaging any of the data on the systems themselves. So we want to eliminate all malicious software that would have been placed on the systems. We want to close all backdoors that may have been open to facilitate the attack. Right? We want to patch the exploited vulnerabilities that were used, or if they, that were used in the attack. And we want to force or basically have everyone to basically change their credentials. Right? You don't want to know that we do all of the cleaning up. We basically get the network back in a gear, and some of the usernames and passwords were compromised, especially administrative usernames and passwords. So you want to have everyone essentially change their credentials immediately, right? So that would basically help with the threat removal and getting the company back up and running again. Sorry. So reporting is a very important aspect in terms of when an incident takes place, right? Within Trinidad and Tobago and some other countries, we have a stigma where we would we try to, or we would like to hide stuff that happened to us, bad things that happened to us, which is natural, right? It it is a normal course in life. Things will happen. You may become a target at some point. However, reporting is very important, and it not only serves your organization, but it helps the regulating bodies realize if there's a particular trend that may be taking place, or they may have additional information, or they may be able to help with the investigation because of others who had a similar problem. So, when do you want to submit a report, right? You want to ideally submit the report within 24 hours of becoming aware of the incident, right? It may be true that you may realize the incident at some time after. Whenever that realization happens, you want to report it immediately, right? You want to alert the central bank and, of the cyber incident that occurred. Right, within 72 hours of the incident or becoming aware of the incident, the company should complete a cyber incident reporting template and submit it to central bank as well. Right, so all entities are encouraged to report their cyber incidents to this government portal. So you guys could probably take a note of it, maybe a screenshot. I'm not sure if the slides or the correspondence will be available after. Right, but this is very important. So we have a basic template of the sheet that central bank would have in terms of reporting a cyber incident. Right. So of course you would want the basics of the organization itself, the assessment of the how what type of impact that the organization would have had. You want to give examples. You want to be as detailed as you possibly can, right? The chronological order of the events once it has been determined, from the initial breach all the way up to what was affected, what was taken, and of course the subsequent retreat of the criminals, right? The root cause. The root cause analysis as well. Right, and lastly, the recommendations. So coming out of the incident and coming out of the investigation, what are you going to do? What steps are being taken in terms of one, preventing a similar incident from happening again, and finding out what was the cause of the incident itself, what triggered it, what was the reasoning behind the attack on this particular entity? Was it just mischief? Was it that the company is involved in something controversial and it may be an activist group? What was the cause? What was the effect? What was the reason for the attack in the first place? Right? And of course, the timelines to put all of these changes in place in order to, one, prevent that attack from happening again, and two, to make the information and the company safe to continue their business subsequent and after the attack. So failure to report incidents as outlined above, it may result in increased supervisory oversight because, of course, information needs to be shared. Yes, it may be embarrassing to the company, but information needs to be shared so that others could, one, learn from it, and two, others would have the option or the ability to learn from it. Right? So failure to report incidents, you could have increased supervisory oversight and, including but not limited to enhanced reporting, so they may ask you for more details, so they want to know everything now, and the issuance of the compliance directions that were relevant. So moving forward and finishing my section, right? You want to review and you want to improve your security. You want to conduct a thorough review of the incident to understand, how it happened, why it happened, and of course, what can be improved and what can be done in order to keep this incident from reoccurring, right? It's one thing to have an incident um, that brings down a company, but if that company is basically being repeatedly targeted, right? There are instances where that has happened. What is being done? How are they clearing up the back doors? How are they, cleaning up the infrastructure so that these incidents, for the very least, the previous ones would not be repeated. And of course, looking forward, trying to mitigate and trying to anticipate future attacks if it's something that is ongoing. Right, so of course, you want to update the cyber disaster recovery plan that Obika would have laid out for you guys. And of course, you want to strengthen your security protocols in order to prevent future attacks. Right, so my name is Joel Mitchell, and that would be my portion on response. Right, so back to you, Gracia.
Thank you so much, Joel. And I think both presentations by Obika and Joel are very critical. And that being said, I hope everyone is paying attention because I have a poll question 3 to launch, which is actually a correct answer only question. So what is the defining distinction in scope and function between an incident response plan and an incident response playbook? Take your time, but which one of the options do you think is correct? Great, great. I'm seeing some good attendees here. So we're all favoring option 3. Let me see, what else is happening? All right, so I will let you know that option 3, the IR plan, is a strategic document detailing scope, rules, and the overall framework, while the IR playbook is a tactical document detailing specific scenario-based procedures. But great effort, guys. Thank you so much. And just in case you would like to see the central bank guideline for yourself, I've placed in the chat the URL to access all of the details of the guideline, the self-assessment, and the incident reporting form that Joel shared. Okay, so we have something very interesting in store for you guys. What do you think a cyber incident simulation looks like? So I don't know myself. So this is why Anthony is going to show us what exactly that would entail. Anthony, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gracia. I am just going to share my screen here now. Okay. Is everyone see my screen? I just need one response.
Yes, I can see your screen. And by the way, Anthony, just to let all attendees know, this is an interactive segment. So please open your mics, raise your hands, and, ask as many questions as you want. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Gracia. So, as Gracia had said, there, my name is Anthony Pearson, and I'm presenting on a simulation of an incident, right? So what that means is that you would be seeing a video. It's going to be very interactive. I'm going to be asking questions, and I would like you all to participate as much as possible. There are no incorrect answers, right? Answer as as best as you can with the information that was given by Obika and Joel and Gracia in the previous presentations, because all the answers are there, right? So let us begin, right? So once you want to answer a question, just raise your hand. If you have any questions, raise your hand. So I'm gonna pause in between the videos from time to time just to make some points. So with this screen here, it says when preventative security fails, response matters most. And that's very important, right? Why it is important is this. If you cannot prevent an event, if you cannot detect an event, the only option you have is to respond to an event, right? So what we are looking at today is how best you can respond to events. So responding to an event is necessary, but when you look at it, there's a saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So what we are looking at today is the cure. And yes, the cure does cost a pound, right? But you also need to be cognizant of the fact that you need to have that cure in place, right? But if you invest in preventative measures, preventative security, and detective security, it reduces the likelihood that you will have to spend on a response, right? But if you notice what I said, it reduces the probability. So let's continue. So what we will learn about? We will learn about 3 critical phases of enterprise incident response during this simulation. Phase 3 is analysis. What is analysis, right? If you recall one of Obika's slides, he showed seven phases of an incident response or incident response plan. First one is prevention or preparation, right? The second one is detection. And number 3 is analysis. Number 4 is containment. Number 5 is eradication. Number 6 is recovery. And number 7 is lessons learned, right? What did we learn from this particular event? So I just want to give an analogy on what is analysis. Suppose you're not feeling well, right? Not feeling well is the incident. And how do you know you're not feeling well? You have a fever. Fever is your body's way of letting you know that you're sick, so that is detection. So now you need to be analyzed. Where do you go to get analyzed? You go to the doctor. The doctor will let you know based on what the doctor sees in your system. The doctor will let you know, okay, this is the problem that you have. If it's a flu, if it's a bacterial infection, the doctor will let you know what is the cause. And this is what the analysis phase is about the cause. So then we move to phase 4, which is containment. What is containment about? So again, we use the analogy, you go to the doctor, you're sick, What is containment? Containment is to take whatever you have in terms of an infection and prevent it from spreading. So the doctor will say, here's what, when you go home, you're very contagious. When you go home, use a face mask, or when you go in public, use a face mask because you don't want it to spread, right? So containment is about preventing the spread. Let's move to phase 5. Eradication. So can anybody in the audience tell me what they think eradication is about? I am looking for hands. I am looking for hands. I am not seeing any hands. It is very easy. We're using the same analogy. I am not seeing any hands. I want to see at least one hand. One, just one hand. I get to no hands. Aha! I see a hand here. Tina.
Would it mean getting rid of it?
Exactly, Tina. Very well. Round of applause. Round of applause, sorry. Round of applause. Exactly. That is what it means. So if we use the same analogy, you're sick and you go to the doctor will prescribe some medication, right? That medication is what you would use to get rid of it. And those three, that analogy would explain those 3 phases. Analysis, where you get checked out to find what making you sick. Containment, to keep it from spreading. And eradication, to get rid of the sickness, right? Very, very good, Tina. So we're moving now into the simulation. So the name of the company is Company Inc. It started with 1 click and it became a full-scale breach. So let's see what happened at Company Inc. So meet Bob. He's a dedicated worker who regularly works late to support the business, right? So Bob is a good worker. He's attentive, hardworking, but like many employees, he can be exposed to risks without realizing it. He clicked on a link on a strange email and then nothing happened. Boom, 2 months later. It begins a ransomware attack. A ransom note, which is something that you usually get during a ransomware attack, will appear on infected computers. So the infection usually spreads, and it will spread and it will make the doing business difficult. Computer Inc. then calls in the IT department to see what they can do. The infection continues to spread, right? IT is trying, but the infection continues to spread. It spread to more servers. So I want to pause it there and ask a question. Which parts of this scenario resonate with any one of you, your experiences? And which part resonates? Looking for hands again. Looking for hands. I'm not seeing any hands. We must have had some sort of experience with situations like that. You don't have to say anything about what took place in your company, but you could speak about other incidents that you heard about. Well, I have had a lot of experience. So I'll talk about my experience. I've had a lot of experience. My experiences lasted about 3 decades thus far. And I have seen a few of these incidents. And time again, one of the things that struck me is that when the analysis is completed, you would find that the source of the infection or compromise would be coming from an employee, which they would have considered a really top employee, right? And the problem is most of the time it's not the employee's fault. The employee is just doing their job. However, as Obika had indicated, in incident response management, one of the areas of focus should always be the people, right? And if you don't focus on your people and provide them with the necessary tools and training, then they would inadvertently make mistakes to the detriment of the company or the organizations that they work for. And most of the time it's not their fault. It's just that they were ignorant to certain facts or certain situations, and they made mistakes. And because of that, the organization or organizations would have paid a heavy price. So we're moving along. So there's something that is common. It's like a common denominator that you'll find in all of these situations. And you will see what that common denominator is. Chaos. I have been a member of multiple IT departments, and over the course of my career, and chaos is something that we deal with all the time. But when you're dealing with a situation that affects the entire organization, like a ransomware attack or a very contagious virus, you tend to end up in a situation that's very chaotic. It's madness. And the reason why it's madness is because no one has a plan. No one has a plan. No one was trained to deal with these type of situations. So we are working from the top of our heads. We don't know what to do, but we decide, okay, here's what. We will have war rooms and we will sit down and try to figure out the situation while we are being impacted. So we are losing customers, our customers can't get service, and we are sitting down having meetings to decide on what to do. And it's because we don't have a plan. And it creates a chaotic environment. So what happens with chaos? You can't serve your customers, right? Your customers want service. They can't access your service or your products because your systems are down. Your customer service agents, they get flooded with calls. And because they get flooded with calls, again, this is people, and they may not have the training to deal with irate customers. And what happens is that they tend to lash out at your customers. And what happens when your customers experience this type of, response from you, their service provider? They take that as a negative experience, and it then damages your reputation, And eventually you start losing customers and your customer churn will start ticking up. With a little training, your customer service agents or your service desk will be able to deal with irate customers. So again, that is people. That is people again. That's the focus area in dealing with incidents, the people part, and communication. I'm not sure what kind of words she's saying, but it don't seem to be nice words. Also, your supply chains can get impacted. You can't receive products or services because your CRM is impacted. Your ERPs impacted. So this organization, Company Inc., is facing all of these problems because of that ransomware infection that infected their systems. And for many of us, compliance is a big driver for governance and ensuring that we do the right things. And because we are compliance focused, like banks, credit unions, manufacturing, insurance companies, because we are so focused on ensuring that we maintain compliance, we tend to reach the point where an incident will force us out of compliance. And that is a serious situation because we could end up being fined. And I could tell you this, if you are faced with an incident, right, you are still responsible to maintain your compliance. There's no excuse for not maintaining your compliance. So that is something that most of us need to be cognizant of when we face these type of situations. You have to always maintain compliance. When you rebuild your systems, if you have to rebuild and restore your systems, you have to restore them and ensure that they maintain whatever compliance or regulatory requirement your organization has to follow. And then management becomes overwhelmed. Yes, they're getting all the calls. People want to know what's going on, and management is ultimately responsible. So we're looking at phase 3. What happens in phase 3, right? Phase 3 is the analysis phase where you go to get checked out. So now, Company Inc. needs to get checked out. So Company Inc. would need to look for specific resources that can do the checking out. So it's all the analysis, network traffic analysis, endpoint analysis, log analysis, impact assessments. So these are the people who would come in and they would take a look at what is taking place in your organization in order to determine what went wrong, the indicators of compromise. They will do forensics, and then they will understand what is the root cause that created this situation in the first place. So in this phase, there's a lot of checking and analysis and stuff like that. It is very important. There are a couple of things that are very important at this phase. And when we come to the question, then I will ask a question around that. So why is the analysis phase important? So I need to see some hands. This time I want hands. Anybody? Any volunteers? I practically revealed all the answers. No? You could type it in the chat. Anybody? No? Okay. Well, it is important because we want to get checked out. We need to get checked out. We need to know what is the root cause. We need to figure out what is causing this problem, right? In this instance, we know it's a ransomware attack because there are indicators of compromise. One of the indicators would be the ransom note, and then there would be other indicators that the incident analysis team members would discover, right? The key to this phase and the other phases, the other technical phases, is that Ubika spoke about the recovery time objective, right? These phases need to be need to be two things. They need to be accurate and they need to be done very quickly because time would pass if you are unable to figure out what the problem is during the analysis phase. Time would pass very quickly and you would exceed your recovery time objective. And once you exceed your recovery time objective, you would have to think about triggering your business continuity or disaster recovery plan, right? And that is a significant uh, decision that has to be made by the executive, right? So you really would like to have the analysis phase, the containment phase, and the eradication phase done as quickly and accurately as possible. Right, so now we're going to move to phase 4, which is the containment phase. And the containment phase is like putting a mask, a face mask on your face when you're sick. So it is all about one major strategy, and that major strategy is isolation, quarantining or isolation. You want to find where the issues are, and you want to isolate that. So there are a few things or a few methods you could use in order to do that. There's network containment, which is segmentation. So wherever the problem is, like if it's in one part of your network, you isolate that part of the network. Endpoint containment, if there's a sick computer or a sick server, you isolate that. Access control, you prevent normal access to specific sites. Communication, you want to always communicate with all the stakeholders. So the stakeholders would mean management. It will also mean any third-party technical support agents. It could be your security operations center. So you have to maintain communications. Communications is very, very important. So why is containment such a critical phase? Can anybody tell me? Any hands? Any volunteers? I'm only hearing crickets. Well, containment is important because you want to isolate the problem. Once you isolate the problem to a significant degree, you could probably, I'm not saying you can, but you could probably resume operations, right? It depends on how successful your containment measures were, right? It would also mean that you would not have gotten rid of the problem, but the key here is to ensure that you could serve your clients, right? You could serve your clients and resume operations. Your operations most likely would not resume the full operations, but 60% is better than 0%, right? So we're moving on to the 5th and final phase of this simulation. And this phase is the eradication phase. So essentially in this phase, what we'll focus on is getting rid of the problem. So to get rid of the problem, you would run antivirus software, you conduct a password reset across the organization, right? You run virus scans, you change your infrastructure, you add better firewall, you update firmware, you use multi-factor authentication, right? You have to do those things to ensure that you get rid of the infection. Most times, getting rid of the infection occurs, and there's some resident infection that remains. So you have to be very careful, and be very very diligent when eradicating the infection. So this question is the final question, right? And I am not leaving until I get someone to answer this question. So ransomware is removed, but your customer data remains encrypted and inaccessible. Where, oh, it should be, what do you do, right? It should be, what do you do? Okay. What do you do? I need to have at least one hand. This is very important. If you raise your hand, you will probably help other people. It's a very important nugget. Come on, I need one hand. One, just one. Aha! Right, Zoe. Yes.
Would you reach out to a professional?
Yes. That is a really good answer. Reaching out to a professional, because you would need someone to help you either recover your data or to decrypt the data, right? That remains encrypted. But the nugget, that is a very good answer. But the nugget I wanted to share with everyone is that the secret to surviving a ransomware attack is having proper backups. Once you have proper backups of your most valuable information, once you have proper backups, then you are 60 or 70%. Your recovery time would be super fast because you could get rid of the infected systems, and you could restore those infected systems to clean systems and restore it with your data. Your data is what your company runs on, your information, right? Once you have proper backups, and I keep saying proper backups because a lot of the times there are organizations that they run backups on a schedule, but when an event occurs, their backups fail. Their backups fail. You have to have backups that you always test those backups. Those backups are within your recovery point objective. And what your recovery point objective, your RPOs that Obika was had mentioned, is essentially the amount of information that you could afford to lose, right? So what I mean by that is this. If your RPO or recovery point objective is 24 hours. It means that your company could afford to lose 24 hours of new data, right? And usually your RPO is dependent on the industry that you are working within. Like if you're in the finance industry, transaction data or transaction information may require a much higher or a much stringent, much more tight recovery point objective. It might be 5 minutes, it might be 10 minutes, it might be 15 minutes, it might be an hour. But when you have a situation where you have very tight RPOs, you have to ensure that your backup system is working, your backup and restoration systems are working properly, one. And two, it usually costs you more money when you have a tighter RPO situation, right? So it would mean that you would have to run more cycles. You have to run more backups, more testing, that sort of thing, right? But backups. Once you have data and your data is backup and it's a good backup, then it will save you a ton of headache. So backups are the key, right? So that brings me to the end of this presentation. I'd like to thank Zoe and I think Tima for answering the two questions that I posed to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well, Anthony. And we can also thank Clarion. She did put something in the chat in response to your last question. She suggested the incident recovery phase, data restoration, which is backup, and system validation and monitoring. So thank you so much. I appreciate everyone staying on. I know we've actually run over time. So I quickly want to bring back Obika to close us out with incident recovery. And then if we have like a few minutes to spare to let Roxanne say some parting words, and then we'll let you go by 1 o'clock.
All right. Thanks again, Gracia. Let me, so as to keep in time, I'm just going to go through the points. Oh, sorry, I'm just double check to make sure. All right, yeah. So I'm just going to go through the high level points in terms of incident recovery. So we spoke about readiness, which is a really big section. There's a lot to do in readiness. Response is just as equally important as Anthony and by extension Joel had shown. There's a lot of aspects to the recovery part in terms of the eradication, the containment, and so on and so forth. Now comes to the recovery part. This is probably one of the more critical areas, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a system that has been down or infected, and you're trying to get it back into production, into a normalized state. And at the same time, you want to prevent the cyber attack from happening again, right? How this occurs is that it's a simple four-stage process. You have your system recovery, your validation and hardening, your system restoration, and then you have a lessons learned, right? Again, this is also dependent on the RTO and RPO, and how that dependence is it's in relation to that dependence is as it relates to recovery strategies. Now, when you're doing recovery strategies, this should really be more to the beginning, but the reason why I put it in here is just for the context of recovery or incident recovery. Again, when you conduct a BIA, as part of conducting that BIA, you set your recovery targets, or your RTO and your RPO. And then based on that RTO and RPO, you then develop your technologies to support bringing your systems back up within that RTO or RPO, or by extension, recovering those systems if you go beyond that RTO, right? One of the areas of this slide that I want to focus on in particular is that table down to the bottom. I mean, the diagram on the side kind of shows as to how you're supposed to put together your recovery strategies in terms of understanding what technologies are necessary to meet those strategies. But the table in particular, I want to point out. And the reason for that is because if you notice, as your RTO and RPO starts to go down in terms of the time gets shorter, the more money you're going to have to spend in terms of that recovery technology, and by extension, the use of disaster recovery sites in order to keep within that RTO time limit, or by extension, that RPO, however it is, right? So it's extremely important that you try and go through that business impact analysis as part of your whole incident response planning and procedure, so that you know what is necessary to recover. So let's talk about system recovery now. First thing you do before system recovery is make sure to do some level of digital forensics. So that is collection of all the data from the infected system or the system that went down prior to recovering a system. So you have two types of recovery. You have restoration of damaged files and bare metal restoration. Restoration of damaged files is just basically you take your last backup and you just restore it to the primary system. Whether now that backup could be from the primary system itself, or if you did fail over into a secondary server, you take the backup of the secondary server and you move it to the primary, right? It depends on the context, right? There's no restoration of the operating system. You're just really restoring the files. For the bare metal, this one is a lot more rigorous. You basically remove all the data from the server, right? If you're running virtual machines, that includes wiping the entire hypervisor and system as well, depending on how expansive the infection was, right? Because as we know, some viruses can actually escape out of your VM and jump into the bare metal itself and hide there, waiting for you to restore the system, and then it triggers again. All right. Again, it's you restore a snapshot of the operating system as well as these files and everything like that as part of your bare metal restoration. It's probably the most reliable method. However, if you have a high degree of certainty that the threat has been removed from the system without affecting the operating system, you should just really restore the damaged files. After you restore your damaged files, you go into validation and hardening. When your system is recovered, it's in a pre-incident state, and it should really be contained in a non-production environment, right? Or isolated environment. The first thing that you do is you harden, right? This hardening could be anything from upgrading the applications, restricting system services and ports, changing accounts, installation of software patches, sorry. And then after the hardening, you have to validate the system. So you have to validate to make sure that the system is secure before you put it into production. So that could be done through penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, SIEM monitoring, file integrity monitoring, and user acceptance testing. What I would say is, at a minimum, vulnerability scanning, the SIEM monitoring, and the user acceptance testing should be done at a minimum for your validation procedures. You can do penetration testing depending on the type of incident or how bad the incident was, or where it was. There is a context fit. And you can also do file integrity monitoring as well, depending on the type of incident or how serious the incident was impacting to your organization. But ultimately, you should validate the system before you put it into production. Restoration is moving the system from that secure environment into production again, you need to follow your change management procedures, and you need to do some level of proactive monitoring on that system to identify any sort of instability or any anomalies. If an alert is generated from that system, you immediately kick off your plan. Now, it's not to say that you put the system back into a restoration environment. You have to go through the entire life cycle again. So you have to do the analysis, see what is the reason for the alert, determine whether or not you take the system offline, and you try and eradicate the threat if it's still there, or you just fix the instability that is in production and then you continue as normal, right? It really, again, it's really contextual, but you should trigger your incident response plan during that elevated monitoring of the system. And then after everything is back to normal and you've reached the end of your recovery process, you do the lessons learned. This is a critical part of your incident response program. You should do this at the end of every incident. This is done in 2 phases. You have the incident closure and the post-incident review. The closure is just archival of all the evidence and communications and notifications to the personnel that you're going to close the incident. If you did issue a report, you should try and issue a final report or update the relevant authorities that you've reported to in terms of this particular incident. And then you do a post-incident review. For the post-incident review, you look at the various steps that occurred during that incident. So you look at how the incident was detected, you look at internal and external communications, you look over the plan and the playbooks to see if everything went well as expected. You look at the personnel review, as in the persons in the incident response team, to see whether or not they handled the incident appropriately, or if they had difficulties trying to contain the incident or even eradicate the incident. And then last but not least, you have the business resilience review. Now, that business resilience review is really a review of your movement from the incident response to the business continuity or the DR. Now, that only happens if you trigger your business continuity or your disaster recovery. If you haven't triggered it, you don't need to do the business resilience review. However, if you do trigger it, you should at least talk about it in the post-incident review to see whether or not you have committed to those RTOs or those RPOs, or if there was an issue in terms of the escalation to trigger off the business continuity plan or the disaster recovery plan. Sorry. And that leads me to the end of the section. So I'll take on any questions, or is it that you would want Roxanne to speak? Say something first before you take questions.
Well, we can do both. So
Okay.
as Obiko mentioned, open the floor, ladies and gentlemen, to ask your questions, which you can place in the Q&A box. But I will ask Roxanne to, I'm not sure if your camera is working, Roxanne, because I know there's an electricity issue, but I did your presentation in the lieu of time, but I know there may be some salient points you may want to just reinforce regarding central bank.
Actually, Gracia, thank you. I can't underscore the point and the need for business continuity, not just cybersecurity prevention. So while we had a full power outage all day yesterday, all our backups were exhausted and they did not recharge. So today's power outage was absolutely unexpected. But good planning. You had my presentation and I listened and you done me well. I just want to thank everyone for supporting us in these series of webinars that we've been given. This is our fourth cybersecurity webinar. It's our second paying one. And I want to thank all the participants, all our supporters, everyone who's come out. And with regard to the central bank's cybersecurity guidelines, the one thing I will say is that while they were meant for regulated entities, it is extremely important to understand that not only do the cybersecurity guidelines help you to do good business. It helps you to do good, sustainable business, because it is, while it is meant for regulated entities, anyone can download them and adopt them. And of course, I believe it was Zoe who said, and call a professional to help you. And that's why we have a consortium of professionals here today. And that's why Calibra, our sponsoring partner, is actually here. They offer all the necessary solutions. So while these things may have sounded like a lesson in a foreign language, they are able to break it down for you and to assist you. And I might add, we are also not just partners, but clients of Calibra's, and their solutions are very affordable. And with that, I want to just say thank you and turn it back to you for questions.
Thank you, Roxanne. And I'll mention, so both Roxanne and Regional Compliance Consultants, as well as Calibra, we can be reached at these contact details here. And also on social media, RCC is on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, I believe. And then Calibra, we are also on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. And I think another salient point, Roxanne, to mention is, yes, ask for help. As Obika mentioned, don't be overwhelmed if you don't have enough resources to build out a sound team initially. The most important thing is to start. And to say thank you to everyone, we will be posting an exit survey as you leave. Please tell us how we did, if the content was good, what else you'd like us to cover in future webinars. Thank you so much. And again, we're here if you have any questions, but I am cognizant of time. Well, I'll ask one question that actually came up during Obika's segment. Obika, in terms of testing, is there a recommended frequency? How often should it be done?
Annually. You should at least annually do your testing. What I would say, however, is that depending on the size of your organization, oh, I'm not on camera. Hold on. Yeah, depending on the size of your organization, you should test I guess if you're a small organization, you can do testing annually. If you're a larger organization, it can be semi-annually, right? At least for the tabletop testing. For the live testing and the partial testing, that depends on the risk and the coordination efforts on the part of the individuals who are managing the incident response. So like I said, I think earlier, when I was going through the testing, I said at least 2 years for the live testing. So that's usually a good marker. It can be 3 years, but at least 2 years should be fine. Every 2 years.
Thank you so much. And similar frequency question to Anthony, in terms of backups, how often should you maintain a backup? Even if there has been no incident, but just from a precautionary standpoint.
Well, once again, similar to Obika's response, it all depends. It depends on
Side.
oh yeah, it depends on the type of data. It depends on your RPOs, your recovery point objectives. It depends on compliance requirements. However, once you have the capacity to do backups, especially with a small firm or a small company, try to run full backups using like a daily schedule, right? Full backups. And once you have the capacity, with a small organization, you wouldn't need a huge amount of storage, local storage. So it's quite affordable. So as much as possible, just do full backups as much as you can daily if you can. For larger organizations, you probably have to use some kind of strategy to but focus on your critical data. Focus on your critical data first, and then any other data, then you could back those up. But your critical data, like transaction data, CRM data, ERP data, you back up as much as possible, and using your compliance and regulatory your requirements, those type of requirements, and privacy and data requirements. Use all those compliance requirements as a guide to let you know how much and how often you should back up.
Okay, and sure.
Sorry, yeah, could I
Yeah.
just add on to something that Anthony had said? One other aspect of backups that persons tend to overlook is that they don't try to segregate their backups from their systems in terms of their network. So if you are doing backups, yes, you could probably keep one backup locally on your network, but you should have a separate backup stored either offsite or in a secured location somewhere that is easily acceptable, that's separate to the more immediate backup.
Great. And I will ask one more question before we close out to everyone, all our panelists. So Joel, you could rejoin us as well. So considering at the beginning, we said, cyber threats are becoming more and more prevalent. They're going to happen on an increased basis. We've seen the stats or a glimpse of the stats for Trinidad specifically. We know now that incident management, incident readiness, recovery response has to be part of your strategy because inevitably an incident is going to happen. So what one piece of advice, considering your section, so Obika, you did readiness and recovery, Joel, you did response, Anthony, you showed us a simulation through the different steps of an incident. What would be your respective pieces of advice to any company, small, mid, or large, from an IRT perspective, just incident
I
response?
think going back to the central bank guidelines, Cressia, I would say no matter what size, you should have a strategy. No matter, the depth and breadth, but you must at least have something documented to say, this is what we will do. That strategy is absolutely important. Yes, you're going to call a professional, but you should have some sort of a strategic approach to it that outlines what it is you intend to do.
I think for my section in particular, the plan and the team are probably the two areas that I would focus on the most. Because I think it's also pointed out in the guidelines, if I remember correctly, they do ask to ensure that you have a plan in place. So what I would say is just make sure that you identify the relevant persons and you identify the relevant systems that you're going to try and recover as it relates to your whole incident response.
Well, what I would add, as I basically part of the response, I talked about reporting and sorry, and reporting in a timely manner. Now, we talked about organizations, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, and we tend to like to keep things hush hush. We like to tend to keep everything secret, especially bad stuff, because you don't want to be the laughing stock of the industry. But the truth is, reporting is actually beneficial both for yourself and for everyone else in the industry, because if you are hit with a particular type of attack, right? You might think that you're unique, you might think that, you failed in some way, but what I would say is, reporting is important and there is no shame in it. Report the incidents because your report could help save somebody else down the road, another organization. Your report could help to put future policies in place, by the governing bodies, that things that they may not have considered before. So my one piece of advice, just go with it and do the reporting as stipulated. That would be my advice.
Well, my piece of advice would be in line with what everyone just said. It also would focus on. So uh my advice for like small organizations and even large ones would be to at least do a business impact assessment. So that way it would then inform on what you need to protect most within your organization, and it will help you to develop a better strategy and a more cost-effective strategy for an incident response plan, which will also include all the auditing, training, and reporting aspects of it. So it starts with a BIA. So that's my advice.
Excellent. And I think in everything, don't be afraid to ask for help with all aspects. So I'd like to thank all attendees for staying with us. See, we still have 12 persons. Appreciate your time. You will receive a recording of the webinar by latest tomorrow in your inboxes. And it includes contacts for both the RCC team and Calibra, whom you can ask for help. Thank you as well to the TCJ team for all the logistical support and for getting us all together. And thank you to my panelists. Really appreciate your time and effort. This was a very well done event. Appreciate how thorough you each were with your respective areas, and looking forward to hosting another one soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.